behind it. And as the water got more shallow, it was dragging me through the sand, and it kept on dragging. And when I finally got to shore, I went to stand up. I did stand up, but my suit didn't come with me. That's just how it is when you try riding the wave. It strips us of everything that's not essential. It's kind of impossible to stay focused, to keep balanced with eyes on the goal, if one is concerned about everything else. When we were founded in the city of Le Puy, it was no different. The crisis was big. People were starving, poverty-stricken, with hope gone, without trust. And out of this crisis was born something beautiful, the Congregation of St. Joseph. Impassioned with the mission of uniting strangers and enemies into neighborhoods where all were considered dear. Love burned strong within them, so strong that it enkindled a bonfire called God in every heart. People began to realize that they were connected. A terrible crisis evoked the depth of love in Le Puy that changed the course of history far beyond that little village. Staying on the wave of the mission required staying focused intentionally on the goal, and this emptied them of ego and everything else that would get in the way of this important mission. Well, what about our time? Think about it. We're confronted with an escalation of violence on every side, barraged by violent words, images, decisions, actions. Could it be that the crisis of separation from the land of our birth, from all our dear brothers and sisters, and from our own deep self is hard enough to evoke the depth of love so strong that it can once again change the course of history? Will our desire be big enough to strip us of everything that's going to inhibit this mission that's been entrusted to us? Those with eyes to see are seeing a wave of grace rising in our time. And this wave of grace is filled with a different awareness than we're seeing in the media. What you are witnessing is the immune system of humanity rising up to resist and heal political disease, economic infection, and ecological devastation. It's the list of over 2 million groups organized around the world around the consciousness of oneness. If we were to begin reading the names of this group today and go on for 3 more days, and then for 1 more month, and then for 1 more month after that, we wouldn't be finished reading this list. It's the largest social movement in history, Paul Hawkins tells us. And within this wave is a growing awareness that the universe is sacred and still evolving. Does this sound like what sisters, associates, agrégés, and partners in ministry have given their lives for? If this wave of graced awareness is happening, why is our charism so important? Or is it? Well, people of every discipline are saying that the source of most problems in our world is the inability to love. As you look at the world, your neighborhood, the planet, does that resonate? And if it does it tell you why our charism of unioning love is so needed? Each person in this room has had an experience of being seized by love. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So I invite you to remember your experience. This blessing in your life evoked a commitment to live inclusive, outpouring, life-giving, communing love. This blessing entrusted each one of us with a secret that much of the world has forgotten. Unity, oneness, community, wholeness happens only through love. Oneness is more than a concept. The experience of oneness is the result of some self-emptying love pouring itself out to unite in solidarity with others. This same spirit of love is what animates the universe and moved the first people in our charism in Lipui. This spirit of love continues to birth the movement towards wholeness that we are all partaking in. To know the act of love accomplishes the mission of unity is an important contribution we make to the world. To live the depths of this love is a much more difficult task, and it makes a greater contribution. And then to bring about cultures and a world that magnifies this inherent oneness and love offers hope for the future thriving of the planet. And I want to say, it's worth our lifetime, isn't it? That's why we're here. The greatest thinkers in the world are saying the consciousness of oneness, which happens only through love, needs to be carried by a sufficient number of people for the future thriving of the planet. We, who have been gifted with this charism of love, have a responsibility to find out, number one, what prevents love, and number two, how to enkindle love. And we need to be stripped of whatever is getting in the way, whatever's non-essential, in order to put our minds and hearts to the task. Actually, those astronauts that took the first trip to the moon probably helped us a lot. You see, remember when the world was so excited about going to the moon? Well, actually, something very different happened. Those astronauts turned and looked back and saw a beautiful, miraculous living being. And after that, the story of the unfolding universe began to shape the thinking of our world. To our surprise, it resonated with what the great religions of the world had always been trying to teach, but most of us couldn't understand because we were looking through the lens of separation. Now, we see that love is the source, the design, the goal of the evolving cosmos. Teilhard points out that this unfolding love is Christ. The incarnation of love in matter is Christ. This means that everything is a sacred incarnation. In the letter to Colossians that we heard, I think it was yesterday, we said Christ is the firstborn of all creation. In Christ, all were created in heaven and on earth. Everything that's visible, everything that's invisible, all were created in Christ and for Christ. Christ is before anything else, and Christ holds it all in unity. So, as we reflect on the unfolding cosmos, we are also reflecting on the emergence of Christ and the evolution of love. This means that love is inherent in everything. If this is so, why do people find it so hard to love? Perhaps the answer lies in a suggestion made by quantum physicists, which says that the universe is composed of interwoven fields of energy. And when there's an oscillation in one of these fields, a wave swells. Under these waves of energy lies a unified field which holds and connects all that is and will ever be. Physicists remind us that musicians, and all you musicians out there know this, because you experience fields vibrating at different levels. And you experience that each field has a special note. You're the ones that allow us to hear it. Aware of this, Dr. David Hawkins, who has a doctorate in theology and kinesiology, those people study muscles and vibrations of fields of energy, gives us a clue in his book, Power versus Force. Every field of energy carries a value, carries an ethics, and carries a perception for seeing life. Since every field vibrates at a different level, he's made a chart. As you look at this chart, it's worth noting that 85% of the population of the world lives with a perception of a world ruled by fear or inordinate desire, sometimes called greed, anger, or arrogance. These are all very ego-centered energy fields. But at the level of 200, a leap happens and courage rises. In fields vibrating under 400, people see themselves as victims of others and victims of life itself. Listen to the news. At the level 400, reason rises above emotionality, and humans are able to handle immense amounts of information, but it is still impossible to truly discern the essence or any critical point in a complex issue. Another significant leap happens when energy level vibrates at 500. Unconditional, a permanent love reveals itself as a state of being. According to these findings, 85% of the population is held in an energy field vibrating under 500. And they simply cannot love unconditionally in a sustained state. No wonder most of the world's problems are caused by an inability to love. But when unconditional love surfaces, people can see the whole picture, not just particularities. A sense of self progressively expands to include the whole universe. Unconditional love dissolves negativity not by attacking, but by recontextualizing. Creativity emerges, accompanied by commitment and the ability to discern. People at this level uplift others by their art, by their music, by their architecture, and simply by their presence. Joy is kind of pervasive. Everything is seen as an expression of love and divinity, and the individual will begins to merge with the divine. People find that the more they love, the more they can love. Stimulated and receptive to love's inspirations. profound love of God and neighbor, without distinction, from whom we do not separate ourselves. Does this description of our charism sound like the unconditional love I was just talking about? No wonder another name for our congregation is the Congregation of the Great Love of God. People at this level, and that is only 0.4% of humanity, know that they are conduits of a consciousness larger than themselves, conduits of the spirit of love, commissioned by the universe for the sake of all those who cannot yet love. When a field of energy vibrates at 600, peace and compassion prevail. Just think what it would be like if this level of consciousness pervade the world. Well, I want to tell you, those of us who are called to ride the wave of this movement of unity, marked by the charism of love, are commissioned to be agents of this future. As we grow in love, we experience everything being connected to everything else, and that infinite presence called love. We experience ourselves as one with the landscape and no longer are the observer, we know we're being observed. People who study and research these things say that only 1 in 10 million people arrive at this state. Jesus, Buddha, and Krishna exhibited a life lived at vibrating at 1,000. They're way beyond this. The thing is that all of us are born into a field of energy that pervades the cosmos. They become visible in cultures which convey values, ethics, perceptions. These energy waves are powerful enough to attract and hold people, to understand the attracting power of a field. Think of a tuning fork. The fork held near another fork begins to vibrate at that same level to the adjacent fork. So when a powerful field of energy becomes an attractor, the thoughts, values, perceptions of that field pass into a human. They become the human who is attracted. Those who experience love pervading the universe know that love is the underlying luring power of all of these fields of energy. Consider the example of how these luring fields can be. For 1 minute, remember the time you were sitting in a room having a discussion, and all of a sudden someone walks into the room, elated, smiling, effervescent, and she's probably radiating a lot of joy. Pay attention to what happened to you. And now you're in the same room, having the same kind of conversation. Somebody opens the door with a glum face. I call it their church face. And they're really depressed, and they start complaining about everything. Notice what happens to you. No doubt, you experienced yourself being drawn a little bit into that field. If you wanted to stay in a different field, it would take an immense amount of energy, especially if the field that entered the room had a negative impact of ego operating. It would be extremely difficult. As a matter of fact, in these situations, deep desire to hold your field or to move into a more loving field is of paramount importance. Desire is the key. Desire has to be great. Desire loosens the field of energy that might draw you or hold you and opens you to moving into a different field. It ignites motivation to choose to take a step beyond the negative field. Sometimes an experience, sometimes a latent desire or goal can be awakened in you. One time, I if you know me, you know I'm not particularly attracted to football, so I was at the Super Bowl party, dead asleep on the couch. And at halftime, I woke up, and everybody went over to the table to eat, and I'm watching this coach being awarded an award for coaching the most professional footballs in football history. And from my toes, out loud comes, "That's what I want to be." And everybody turned around in disbelief. Now, what I didn't say was, I knew at that moment what I wanted to be more than anything else. I wanted to coach people in loving. A latent desire was awakened in me, opened me. An attracting field started to enter me with all of its values and perceptions. That's happened to you. Maybe it was reading a book. Maybe it was watching television. Maybe it was hearing a song or a poem. Something stirred deep inside of you. And if it did, a desire was sparked. And you were open to being drawn into a more loving field. The question is, how do we stay in these fields once we get there? Here's where community becomes absolutely important. This is the negative field that you might have been drawn to. Yeah. Desire is key and community is of the essence. It's extremely important to holding us in consciousness. People of faith know this. They've got to connect with people of that same faith. Gangs know this. As a matter of fact, those in AA know it very well, because if they step out of that field of the group, they find it very, very hard to stay sober. When people in the same field of consciousness connect, the field gets stronger throughout the cosmos. Everything in the universe is interconnected. That's why the field grows stronger throughout the cosmos. Think of what's happening today at this Federation event. You might think it's important to you, but I want to tell you it's an importance for the future and important for every single galaxy in the universe. Because love is being strengthened right at this moment, because we're gathered together and asking to be held in the field of love. We're giving a tremendous gift. In contrast, notice what's happening today in the media, in our nation, in the world. Kinesiologists say that 2% of the population tests very strong for negative attractors and works day and night to convey that field. And every time a wave of negativity passes a wave of love, love is weakened. Furthermore, vulnerable people catch the strongest field, are carried by it, become one with it, and we watch this happening day after day in our news. To resist the seduction of a negative field, we have to intentionally choose charity, kindness, to leap the wall of ego. So communities centered in love provide a wave of loving energy to hold folks, to attract folks. I was in the hospital once, and a Bosnian Serbian from the war came up to me and said, "I heard you live down the street." I said, "Mm-hmm." And she says, "I didn't know it was a convent. When I pass that property, peace takes over me. I go there every day and sit on the bench. It's the only place in the world that I have found peace and feel myself being loved." This happens at all of our mothers' houses and in all of our centers. Years of prayer and love on those properties have contributed to a field strong enough to attract and transform people beyond our imagination. The energy field flows way beyond the walls. Riding the wave of the mission is all about creating communities to be holding fields of love. Kinesiologists tell us that even if one person moves to a level of unconditional love, that person who intentionally abides in that state counterbalances 700 150,000 who are living at a negative level. If 15% of the population of the world chooses to live in love, we can counterbalance the negative effect of the 85%. Given all that's happening in our world, in this very city, I think we all agree there is a real urgency here to unleashing the charism of love and helping people ride the wave. We need to notice, we need to name, we need to invite those touched by the grace of unioning love and invite them to participate in the wave of oneness however they might be able to. Otto Scharmer teaches at MIT. He's the founder of the Presence Institute, has written the book You, Theory You, and another book called Leading from the Emerging Self. He says, there's a changed future trying to be born that's calling for a spirituality of deep relationships with nature, society, and our deepest self, who is God. The culture born of this spirituality is marked by generative listening and conversing, collective sensing, collective decision-making and action, collective creative exploration and invention on behalf of the future mark this culture. Now, when I read this book, I was really excited, and I thought this really has something to offer our conversation today. So I was pretty excited about that. And then I opened my top drawer, and a picture I've had for years but haven't been able to find, probably names the state of my top drawer. Some of you recognize her. This is Julia Harkins, a sister from Boston, who the Federation asked to lead a research team after Vatican II to go back to France and discover our roots. She and her team went all over the Federation, announcing the good news of our mission, which we did not know, which our charism, our spirituality, and our core spiritual discipline of sharing the heart and the core of the house. I was a postulant and a novice. I fell in love with this woman, and I loved what she was telling me about what we were called to be. Her picture reminded me that she gave a talk at a Federation event. And at that time, she talked about the essential means of bonding. I knew Julie was inviting us to pay attention to those today. And I knew that what she was saying then was, in her words, what Otto Scharmer is saying now. This means of bonding includes these 6 qualities. Of course, for Julie, these were all rooted in community. So let's go to the first one. Those who originally belonged to this mission of unity in our charism knew well the importance of sharing experiences we had of unity, of wholeness, of oneness. And they somehow knew intuitively that this would strengthen the field of love, and it would diminish the power of the lure of a negative field. These experiences we've had in our life are touchstones. I remember a time before 9/11. I was begging God for a grace of an experience of oneness so profound that I would never forget it. Watch what you pray for. The planes flew over the Twin Towers. An employee knocked at my office door, told me what was happening, and said, everyone's coming to the chapel. Lead a prayer. Walking into the chapel, I was overcome by a flood of negative thoughts and words that had passed through me in my life. I knew at that moment that those had sent out an energy that some poor, vulnerable folks were now incarnating. I wanted desperately to separate myself from the evil. It was impossible. The negativity I had entered into was coming back embodied in terrorism. And I knew we were one. That experience stayed with me all day. I could not shake it. When I walked into the house that evening, the TV was on, and I saw before my eyes hundreds of women and men, firemen and women, walking into the flames of hell. And instantly, another litany started going through me of thoughts, words, actions that had passed through me in my lifetime that were very positive and loving. And I knew these people were incarnating that energy. And then, as I stood there, I experienced myself walking into the flames in their bodies. We were one. The memory of this experience brings me home to myself often. You've had those experiences. To share those experiences, those deep experiences, evokes memory, generates a desire to be more, deepens affect and communion among us. These experiences carry a knowing beyond knowing, and they are a gift of grace, but they remind us always of our true identity. Sometimes these mystical moments are fleeting because the negative field of separation is so very strong in our world. Generative sharing about these experiences strengthens the field of unity, making it a strong attractor to lure and hold us. We owe it to one another to share these graces. They aren't given for us alone. This happens to be what we're called to do for one another. And not only for one another, because every time we do it, we strengthen the field and the whole cosmos. And we are committed to strengthening the wave of oneness. We're committed to helping one another remember who we really are. We cannot let one another forget this. Generative conversations stimulate intention to abide in this awareness. Teilhard tells us that energy follows intention. Please beg for the gift to be intentional. And if that grace is given, energy will follow the direction of unioning love and deepen connections in every being, past, present, and to come. The mission is furthered just by being intentional. Generative conversations prevent us from being engaged in trivial pursuits, and I don't mean the game. They're trivial conversations, spending time, wasting time, and talent on trivia. This can knock us right off the wave. Generous conversations lead us to dream and act on behalf of what's really important. They keep intention alive and give us insight for the next step we're called to take. So what about sharing our experiences of the core values of our spirituality? Otto Scharmer calls for a spirituality of relationships. And we know our spirituality is inclusive, outpouring, communing love, zeal, faithful listening to the next step the Spirit's inviting us to take on behalf of being more hospitable to that which has been left out of our love. Those who first belonged to this movement of unioning love made a point of sharing these core values that were operative in the present moment of their life. And of course, implicit in sharing is the invitation to generative listening, to one another, and to our deep self. As we listen to our life from the consciousness of oneness, which one of these values is most operative in your life right now? Which field of energy is carrying you? Or which do you notice carrying the media? Or which do you notice carrying our nation? Remember, when we see it out there, we are one with it. It is us. Inclusive, outpouring, unioning love? Or is it zeal for the mission? Is it faithful listening to the next step? Or are you, the church, the world, welcoming hospitality for the idea, the person, the culture, or the system that's never before been included in our love. If we share which of these is most operative in our larger self, understanding, reverence, and the desire for the well-being of all deepens among us, and a wave of oneness is strengthened. I have someone who comes for spiritual direction who says, I never speak until I feel the holy nudge. I've been at meetings with this man. When he opens his mouth, it's profound. I believe this generative listening of our charism is that to which Otto Scharmer refers. It's not downloading. You know what I really know about this person? My head starts saying, I know what she's going to say. She's always saying the same thing. She's harping on it, as a matter of fact. Nor is it the listening for facts so I can debate the issue. Nor is it even empathetic listening so I can get into the shoes of the other. It's great, but that's not the listening of our charism. We're called to the more. The generative listening, and this is the listening of coaches and spiritual directors, that allows us to connect to the emerging and future self that's trying to manifest itself. This kind of listening is kind of like the jazz player. You know, they're all in flow. They listen to the whole and simultaneously attune their instruments to an emerging pattern. And thus, together, they co-create something brand new. It's so fun to listen to them. I suggest this is the listening, complete with the self-surrender of the humility of our charism that is so critical for our time. Holding places for this type of listening are essential to the evolution of the future. Could it be that our charism is offering us to the world to be such a holding place? Now, we know that the core spiritual discipline of sharing the state of the heart and the order of the house contributes to the field of love and to our deepening communion. We know that. When we practice the discipline, we give ourselves to that Eucharistic dynamic that's happening in the whole universe. Sharing our experiences of God with others, listening and receiving one another's lives, we flow into one another. Our body becomes the body of the whole. Or as Madai says in the Eucharistic letter, there's a body without a body. We're transformed from an ego awareness to an echo awareness of self that includes every single system the more we listen. And the future depends on activating this field of listening, because there's infinite possibility abiding in this field. We let go of our own ideas, our own dreams, our own agendas, and we begin to co-sense what's emerging. We begin to be co-inspired and give ourselves wholeheartedly to the emerging next step in co-creating a world of love for the future. What if we realize the implications for this generative listening and responding and co-creating? Intentional commitment to the next step deepens the field of love in every single galaxy. It is no little thing. When Otto Scharmer says, where are the holding places for this type of listening? Where do people go to learn to co-sense, co-create, co-organize? Apparently he doesn't know us, right? Our times are inviting us not only to do this ourselves, they're inviting us to extend this core discipline to others. One of our associates, who was retiring from the Department of Social Security, held his final meeting where all the heads of the departments gathered together in Baltimore. And he said, I have one more thing to tell you. It's again what I learned from the Sisters of St. Joseph. And on that day, he led the high-ranking officers of the Social Security Department in sharing of the heart in the order of the house. It was such a success that this practice continues at all their local meetings in order to discern the next step this department is called to take. I ask, could this be the next step in furthering our mission that we are called to take, to coach others in the spiritual practice of sharing the heart and the order of the house? Of course, what goes with this, as Julie said, was sharing what enhances and prevents that mission from happening. Remember a time, when you were a team, when you really had the sense of being one. What was it that helped that happen? Just think for a minute. Okay, now think of a time when you were together and team and community didn't happen. What prevented it? These questions are really important. Many of the things on the side of preventing it could probably be reduced to going ahead of grace, over-eagerness, or refusing to take the step the Spirit was inviting us to take, better known as complacency. Many times these two dynamics have other nicknames: overwork, overdrink, overbuying, over this, over that, going beyond our boundaries, or refusing to go beyond our boundaries of love, protecting ourselves. We have an infinite number of excuses. But since everything is interconnected, are we recognizing that in preventing ourselves taking the next step, we're preventing the evolution of the universe? We're preventing the emergence of Christ by choosing to drag our feet? Or are we realizing that going ahead of grace, everything can fall off that wave? The implications are huge. And that is why we need to make generous promises. Promises help us stay focused. They help us stay intentional and ride the wave of the mission. Making collective, generous promises evokes collective energy to create, to initiate new partnerships, new ministries, new systems that have not even yet been imagined to strengthen this wave of oneness. Throughout history, through generous promises, we started school and hospital systems. We birthed outreach to the poor and the orphaned. We walked to Selma. We were imprisoned for teaching Black people and for protesting nuclear arms. Promises led us to give our bodies to find a cure for polio and our brains to find a cure for Alzheimer's. We gave our artistic talents to awaken the world to the consciousness that all is one and the universe is evolving. We have led the church and the country in working against the death penalty. In so many additional ways, these promises have contributed to the future of the universe. Now, there's a huge future trying to be born, reflected in the wave of oneness that's rising. It's calling everybody to care about the whole of every institution, every system, every species. It's a future where nature is the common good, where everyone contributes their gifts for the well-being of all. And the greatest resource is recognized as the collective creativity of every being in the community. The whole community decides what it wants to do with its resources to serve the mission. The basis of decision-making is whether it appreciates or depreciates collective creativity. Community involvement in innovation and exploration of prototypes to carry this wave of oneness into the future is the activity of the day in this new culture. This task calls for an immensity of diverse gifts. Here is where we are called once again to divide the city, just as our foremothers did. Only this time, we don't have all the gifts, and we have to include more than just individuals. We have to reach out to corporations and to systems to partner with us, and we are already doing this. We know that we have an NGO seat at the United Nations, and we collaborate with NGOs around the world in order to advise the Security Council of the United Nations. We know that we chose to use our resources this week to collaborate with this hotel in signing the first APPAC treaty here in Disney, where more children are trafficked than any other place in the world. Do you know what this means, to have one hotel sign that APPAC treaty? It's huge. And then, realizing what trafficking is doing, the Congregation of St. Joseph, together through CSJ Ministries and Kim through the Exchange Initiative, united with Washington University to develop that first app in order to help people get involved against trafficking. And the FBI is now collaborating with us on this. Knowing that a caring relationship with nature can transform consciousness and heal minds and bodies and souls, the Kalamazoo Nature Center has collaborated with one of our congregations to engage in a partnership to design, pilot, and present the first program in our country for urban poor families to learn to relate with nature. In addition, engineers in the Netherlands and Shanghai who know how to manage water, together with a gifted architect and gifted grant writers, in addition to the sewer board and the mayor of New Orleans, FEMA, Homeland Security, and of course taxpayers, have collaborated in a partnership with a congregation and their land to transform the way the city relates to water by designing a replicable water garden and an education site which will spare 3,780-acre radius in all directions from flooding when the next Katrina happens, and it will lessen the flooding in a 9,000-acre radius. This collaboration is opening the eyes of all these folks to the fact that water is sacred, that the land is sacred, that every species is sacred. And the common good is recognized as nature itself. These folks are part of the movement of union and love. They're riding the wave of the mission. And I invite you to fill the air of this room with other stories, because all your congregations are doing this. We need to divide the city, enter into the partnerships in order to increase that wave of oneness for the sake of a future. Otter Sharma says, companies, small countries are living some of these practices, are creating these prototypes, influencing history. Most of the stories he tells are outside of the U.S. He says our U.S. culture is not ripe enough to hold such oneness. However, he didn't tell the story of the Congregation of the Great Love of God, moving through history since 1650 France. I think he would have found in us a holding place for a future culture of the world. What do you think? Great thinkers of our world ask, who will be the holding spaces for sensing the emerging future? Could our charism be called to this next step in riding the wave of oneness? Great thinkers are asking, who is tending the consciousness of the planet? Could the next step we are called to take in our intentional living of the charism be to promise collectively to tend the consciousness of the planet? Great thinkers are asking, who is presently living this future with its structures and systems in place so that a wave of awareness can crest and carry a whole new future way of being to shore? This, I think, is what we were born for. This, I think, is what we live, work, pray, and play, and have our being for. So may you and I, and all of those other sisters, associates, auditors, partners in ministry, and every other name we've included in this movement, always keep in mind the aim of our vocation, for truly it is sublime. And to this we say, Amen.
Well, I think we may forget many things that have been said here as the days unfold, but I don't think any one of us will ever forget the image of the potential and the challenges and the results of riding the wave. So thank you for your honesty in sharing that. Or not. Yesterday, Mary Johnson called us to dialogue with various aspects of life and society. And one that she mentioned in particular was religion, spirituality with science. And it is quite evident, and I think even more so in your second presentation, that you live there. But even more so, you make it accessible for those of us who might be a little challenged by some of those words and phrases and writers that you're so at home with. And that is really a gift. But you also reminded us of our roots and our traditions and all the ways of being true to our charism as sisters and all partners who work with us and who minister with us, that we have everything that we need, in a way, from our roots and from our past. And that's a gift that many do not have, And so I think, once again, I can speak for all of us when I say, Pat Bergen, you can coach us any day. So we'll now, for our final part of today, have the opportunity once again to reflect on all the words and ideas and images that Pat has left us with. And I'm not going to go through the way that we will be in the small group because from what I can see, you've been doing it really well. But we're going to follow that same pattern, and I'm going to ask the facilitators again to make sure that we invite everybody to participate the way that we have been. It has certainly, obviously, been enriching. And so I would ask the questions could be shown on the screen. And during our quiet reflection time, these are the questions that we will be responding to. What part of this talk spoke to you, challenged you, inspired you? How does religious life as movement resonate with living as the congregation of the great love of God? And then finally, how do the essential means of bonding widen the scope of the movement and help others ride the wave of the mission? And I am going to invite 4 tables to respond at the end of our conversation. I know. And this time, I'm going to be a little fussy as a facilitator. So I'm going to ask you to choose one question that really grabbed the attention or spoke to you, your particular table, and to really focus on responding to that question, 1 or 2 or 3. And I'm going to limit you to 3 minutes in your response. So we will have 4 responses from 4 tables, focusing on one question in particular, and I would ask you to keep to 3 minutes. And I will help you with that if you forget. And these are the 4 lucky tables. Okay. Tables 8, 17, 39, and 51. 8, 17, 39, and 51. And we'll begin with our quiet time, and I will invite you out of the quiet together. And I would invite whoever is speaking at this time to finish your sentence. And those who are representing the four tables, if you would move to the closest mic. Okay. And again, I would ask you to give your name, where you're from, and also the table that you are representing. Thank you.
My name is Tracy, and I'm from the Congregation of the Great Love of God. At Table 8. Question number 1 resonated deeply with us, and the power we each hold to choose to intentionally love or not. We are very aware of this due to the current state of affairs of politics and current events here and around the world. Do we choose to spread love? Gandhi reminds us to be the change we want to see in the world. And we call that the butterfly effect, the domino effect, etc. And we know that it can be negative or positive. Do we choose to have positive vibrations and love?
Thank you. Thank you.
Me? Okay. I'm Mary McKay, Table 17. Our conversation went around the second of the points, and it was the conversation was spurred by the word movement and the phrase great love of God. We want to confess at the beginning, two sort of pre-comments, that some of what we say here was not said directly by Pat, but we felt that she implied certain things, and that also she very clearly witnessed to and testified by her presentation, the style of her presentation and the way she talks, that the few things we'll say now were in fact communicated by Pat, although not in her words. So this reflection is that the great love of God is a movement. It's a mutual movement. It's the always growing greater love of God, both on God's part, always approaching all of the creatures that have flowed out of God's great love, including us, and our reciprocating and trying to follow that pattern of moving back towards God and all of the things that have flowed out of God's great love, always growing greater love. And because of that, it's a movement. It's a mutual movement. And one thing that Pat did say that caught our attention here is that this, in fact, is the pattern of the universe. So in some way, it's not a unique gift given to members of the Congregation of the Great Love of God. It's the imprint on creation of the way God is. That there's a movement and an attraction, a mutual attraction, and we feel the effect of that attraction by our desire for God. So what we've received is the gift of becoming aware of the great pattern of life that we are called to keep living and trying to communicate to others. And that's the movement in us, which is the movement of life.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kay Komodos. I'm from Table 51, and right now I feel like I'm on that crashing shore, because but our table resonated with the first question, what part of this talk spoke to you? And we all agreed that we were all greatly taken by the possibility of energy fields, that in our charism, it is important to combat negativity so we can be carriers of love. Even though we have a world that lives in a spirit of negativity, we can, if we believe and our desire is big enough, be the 15% to help bring about the revolution of love. We have to be the holding space to allow this to happen. In our generative listening, we can garner collective inspiration. It is in community that holds this consciousness to desire the space for bonding. The metaphor of the river from this morning carries through the theme of this afternoon. And one of our table members, Meg, found a poem, and I'm going to read part of it right now that speaks to that. It's from a Hopi Indian. There is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel that they will be torn apart and will suffer greatly. No, the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above water. And I say, see who is in there with you and celebrate.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy, and I'm an associate from Boston, and I'm representing Table 39. And as we spoke this afternoon, we had many common threads in our response to the first question, the part that challenged us and inspired us. So there are two themes that I've kind of picked out to talk about a little bit. And the first responds to the image that we've been looking at this afternoon, the idea of the wave. And when we talked about the idea of riding a wave, first of all, the necessity of stripping away everything that is unessential. If you've ever been on a surfboard, you can't be carrying a lot of baggage. It will simply tip you over and you'll fall off. So stripping away of whatever is non-essential. And then the idea also of when you're riding the wave, you may embrace it for a sense of excitement, the joy, the fun that it will bring. But also there's that element of danger. You never know when you're going to get toppled off, hit on the head with the board, so to speak. So the element of danger, the element of risk, the element of being willing to accept the possibility of your failure, and the challenge of getting back up onto that wave and riding forward again, not giving up and saying, well, that didn't work, forget that. So the whole idea of the motion of the wave, and also that we are not in this alone, and another idea that when you're riding the wave, you have a different perspective. You're on top, you're looking, you can see the bigger picture. So we liked the idea of the riding of the wave being carried and carrying that momentum forward as we work together. So that idea of eventually surrendering to the wave is going to have its power, and we basically have to know that, and we have to surrender to it and let it take its course, and we will be part of that. Another common thread that we had was the idea of the challenge of the charism, and it became very clear in our group that it's not necessarily our job to create the master plan, that God has done that, but it is our job to say yes, to engage, to stay in the present moment, and to engage in that active, generative listening so that we can be what we need to be at the present moment and respond with that loving response.
Thank you. I don't know if it's our new 25% that's with us, but I don't remember so much clapping after reports in past events. So this is a nice addition, and thank you for that. Thank you for that. And for all of the good conversations that happened that we are unable to hear altogether, but I would encourage you to continue those conversations on benches and dinners and rooms and every other place that we will gather in smaller groups and larger groups until we gather again tomorrow. And yet again, I am going to not pay attention to myself and remind you that the bus for Disney Springs is at the main entrance of this place, this convention center. And it's the main entrance. That one you can figure out on your own, but that's it, okay. Now this is a new announcement. Tomorrow we will be having a collection, a real money collection, especially for those of you for whom this is the first time. At the end of the time that is our justice session, which is tomorrow morning, we actually will